Kieran, I want to come to you first about this. Can you tell us, is this now the end of this saga? Because it's been going on for so long. Was this ruling just down to a technicality? Is it going to be pursued any further?
Well, I suppose the judgment is relatively recent and we have to consider that. And Mr. Lee is entitled to advice and that advice be legally privileged. So it will be his decision. There are certainly options there. Of course, as you say in your introduction, it is the highest court and that normally does bring finality to it. There will certainly be no appeal of the inadmissibility ruling because you cannot make that appeal in the European Court of Human Rights. But the laws that Mr. Lee brought his application under, we say remain uncertain, and all the complaints and arguments he had that Europe didn't grapple with remain, and therefore it's likely that other cases of this type could come about.
Can I go to you, Peter? What was your reaction to this decision?
Well, I think after almost 8 years, this cake was bought in 2014. The saga of what turns out to be the not-so-gay cake case is now hopefully over. I think it's a good decision. Ultimately, everybody's human rights have been affirmed. Everyone is better off because of the ruling. And right at the heart of this is the protection from compelled or forced speech. And actually what it means is nobody's going to be compelled or forced to do something against their will. We do have a UK Supreme Court ruling. It was unanimous. It was the highest set of judges in the land, including the Chief Justice at the time, Baroness Hale. It was a really clear ruling. And actually, we do have legal certainty because of that ruling. And the fact that this has been ruled inadmissible kind of cuts off the European option, really. And hopefully that's the end of the saga. And hopefully we now have clarity for everybody going forward and everybody's rights to be not to be compelled to do something against their wishes have now been secured and protected. And that's ultimately a good news story all round.
Kieran, I want to ask you about the Mr. Lee's case, insofar as a lot of people have interpreted this, and I think Mr. Lee would agree, as a discrimination case, that Asher's Bakery were not wanting to serve him on the grounds that he was gay. But of course, that's not the case, is it? Because the bakery were perfectly happy to serve not only him, but any gay customers. It was simply, as was just said by Peter, the message they did not want to express the message that they disagreed with fundamentally. Isn't that right?
Yes, so there was sexual orientation arguments made, and that was whether, support gay marriage. The key issue there was gay, and therefore associated discrimination of a class of people. And then the political opinion was the second, because same-sex marriage was not legal in Northern Ireland until recently, and therefore it was a political message. But the difficult. So it certainly is. The issue was the message, and
yes,
what we were saying was that by printing a message, you're not promoting it, you're not endorsing it, you're not supporting it. It's simple printing, and therefore there's no connection to religious beliefs or political opinion.
So, but you accept, however, that it was never the case that the bakery were discriminating against him on the basis of his sexual orientation?
I don't accept that because it's associated discrimination. If it had said support marriage, that would have been fine. The issue was gay and the word gay in it. So therefore, it's associated discrimination on that class of persons.
Peter, do you accept that view that this could be interpreted as that the refusal was anti-gay, essentially?
No, the Supreme Court were really clear, and I'm actually really surprised to hear Kieran dispute the Supreme Court finding in that sense, or disagree with it and not accept it. Baroness Hale was the most clear on that. She said, look, it absolutely is an affront to human dignity if you deny somebody service on the grounds we're talking about. But she said that is not what happened in this case, and it does the project of equal treatment no favours to seek to extend these kind of rights beyond the proper scope. She was crystal clear, and that argument was made throughout. Had anybody gone to get that cake with that message, we wouldn't have got it, regardless of our sexual orientation. And that's the point. They weren't not serving Mr. Lee because of his sexual orientation. They'd served him before, they would serve him afterwards. There's very clear discrimination rules on this, and we do need to accept the Supreme Court ruling on that, which was crystal clear. It was really, actually, I think, unhelpfully framed by the Equality Commission initially in Northern Ireland. They brought the case initially in the first 3 rounds, and it was kind of pitched as sexual orientation against Christians. And actually, it's a bad frame. Just because some people involved had each of those characteristics, that's not what the case was about. It really came down to, can you be forced to put a slogan on that you disagree with? And the court said, no, you can't be compelled to do something, to use your creative talents, to use your business in this way. And that's really fundamental to the free speech that this particular programme's about.
Yeah, but Peter, do you accept, however, that, when you offer a public service like this, you say we're going to be able to, we'll create whatever cake you like, that doesn't automatically amount to an endorsement of it. If for instance, someone in that bakery was a supporter of, say, the DUP, and someone came in wanting them to create a Sinn Féin cake, it wouldn't amount to a support of Sinn Féin to do so, would it?
So that's one of the unique things about the Northern Ireland law, was the political opinion piece here, and whether you were entitled to say no based on the grounds of political opinion. We have very distinct laws because of some of our history. For good or for bad, those things have been carried over. And I get why there are different responses to how you could have operated in this situation. The point was, are the bakery entitled in this case to say this is so fundamental to them and their set of beliefs that to make this cake would have been using their creative skills and ability to support a campaign, a political campaign that they fundamentally disagreed with? And the court said you can't compel somebody to do that. And I think that's ultimately a good result in a free society.
Kieran, does this open
the outcome
floodgates a little bit?
The outcome is that cake cannot, if someone was looking a political message printed, they could now refuse. And it's the uncertainty that this case creates on the high street. So your example was a good one. And I think, we also look at, is it the person that is baking the cake? Is it the person putting the printer on it? Is it the director, the floor manager, the shareholders? Where does this stop? How do we create that balance?
Kieran, do you think, though, that, a lot of people, when they look at this story, they do think that it's something that has been blown up out of all proportion, insofar as, if I went into a cake shop and they didn't want to make the cake that I requested, couldn't I just go to the cake shop down the road and sort of solve the problem that way?
And I think that's a reasonable viewpoint, but when we have to strip it back, and we're talking about either sexual orientation, political opinion, religious beliefs, racism, whatever it may be, there, it might start off with the very simple: where you sit, why can't you just get the next bus, what side of the street you walk down? All very simple, straight, difficult bits. But it's the principles that matter, and therefore there's a bigger argument here. And the reality is LGBT people in Northern Ireland are concerned, are worried, and they're the ones that are discriminated most here.
Peter, do you have any...
there's a big difference.
Sorry, Peter, I just wanted to ask, are you, Peter, just before we go on, are you concerned at all, Peter, that this might set a precedent whereby, for instance, fundamentalist Christian bakers might be forced to make an atheist cake, for instance, something like that?
Well, the hope is that it's the reverse, isn't it? They're protected from that. As advertisers, we've tried to put advertising hoardings up. Advertisers have rules about what political messages they'll take, what they'll run on billboards, what they'll run in cinemas. This is not unusual. The Church of England even had an ad banned about prayer. That's what advertisers are entitled to do. They put the rules in place. They say these things. So this is not unusual. Lots of groups have to deal with this. If you want to put a slogan or message into the public square, so I think we've got to be very clear to distinguish between where you sit on a bus. Fundamental. Baroness Hill was really clear on this. If you've been discriminated against Mr. Lee because of his sexual orientation, fundamentally wrong, and I'd be absolutely with Kieran on that. But this was about something different. The message on the cake, and we actually
it was quite a frivolous cake, though, wasn't it, Peter? It was a Sesame Street cake ultimately, just with a relatively innocuous message. It wasn't an extreme message, is what I'm saying. You might disagree with the message, but it wasn't an extremist. It wasn't an ISIS cake or something like that,
No, absolutely. And I'm not disputing that, but it did have a campaign slogan on it. And interestingly, it was one of the MacArthurs themselves who took the order. So it was actually the lady who owned the shop herself. And when she reflected on that, she gave her evidence and was very clear about that. And the judges found her very persuasive in terms of the genuineness of her disagreement, that they'd served the customer before. This was not an issue with the customer, but with the message. And I think that was really helpful. And this is a fascinating case legally, and it was really interesting. It raises difficult questions. But we have to learn to balance rights in society. A lot of your show, I think, is about this, as far as I can see. And we're saying there are different rights at times, and we're going to have to work ways through this to do this better, rather than always running to court in these situations. We have different views on things. We've got to be able to disagree and do that, as long as we don't discriminate against individual people. That's profoundly wrong, and I disagree with it. Human rights come out of a Christian understanding of the world, and we need to lean into that. We are the champions of rights and freedom, and we want to keep doing that.
Peter, we don't have much time left, so I just want to give the final word here to Kieran. Do you have anything to say off the back of what Peter has just said?
I think we have to draw hard lines in law, and difficult cases can make bad law, but this law is now uncertain. We should have a high street that everyone should be able to enter a shop and get services no matter what. And just because they're shareholders or directors or limited companies, they aren't certainly endorsing, promoting messages that they supply.
Well, thank you both. This is a fascinating case. We're going to have to call it a day there. I'm afraid we could go on for hours, but let's leave it there.